Welcome back to Velshi and Rule. As the Ukraine controversy continues to unfold, all eyes are on Republicans to see if they will continue to stand by President Trump or move to support the impeachment inquiry. This morning, Republican Senator Mitt Romney strongly rebuked the president's calls to investigate the Biden family, calling them wrong and appalling. But the GOP senator stopped short of calling for impeachment. So far, the Republican ranks have not broken. And while no member of the GOP has explicitly supported impeachment, a few Republican lawmakers have notably pushed back on the president. Retiring Texas Republican Congressman Will Hurd this morning said he was not comfortable with the text messages between U.S. officials and a top Ukrainian aide. Republican Senator Joni Ernst joined Senator Chuck Grassley this week in declaring that whistleblowers should be protected. That was after the president called for that person's identity to be unmasked. Meanwhile, Democratic enthusiasm, no surprise, for impeachment has grown dramatically over the last week, with only 9 Democrats left in the House who have not explicitly come out in support, and one independent congressman, former Republican Justin Amash, has joined Democrats in their calls. But while support for impeachment action among the American people has grown recently, there is still no majority that wants to see the president removed from office. Recent polls from Quinnipiac University, CNN, and Monmouth University show support for impeaching the president hovering right around 50%. Joining us now, Washington Post opinion writer, my friend Jonathan Capehart, and NBC News senior reporter, also a friend of mine, Jonathan Allen. Mr. Allen, let's start with Republicans. How significant is it that Mitt Romney has come out and rebuked what the president has said? We've heard Mitt Romney say some strong things before, but words, they don't mean that much.
Well, it's significant, Stephanie, in this way. He's offering a leadership path, as you suggest, for other Republicans to say this is wrong, for them to find a place that is short of impeachment, to stand up and say this is not the way that an American president should function. However, not necessarily vote for or call for an impeachment. What you have right now is about 99% of the elected Republican officials, through their silence or through their active support of the president, endorsing the president of the United States, using the office of the presidency, using the power of the United States government to investigate a potential political opponent in foreign countries, and to call for the investigation publicly and privately, and possibly to use leverage of funding to get an investigation going against that opponent. So what I think Romney's trying to do is set up a path to at least say you shouldn't be doing that.
I know we haven't heard from many Republicans, Mr. Allen, but you must know this. What are the talking points for those Republicans who are still sticking with Trump? Because those who have tried to make the argument that it's highly unusual and so swampy, I mean, give me a break. If we are now saying it's absolutely unacceptable for children or family members of political officials to take any of these kind of jobs, well, then about half of the people who live in Washington are going to have to move.
I mean, they've got a problem. A lot of them have a problem because it's not clear what their children are going to do for a living from here on out, if that's the indication going forward.
So what's the defense?
The defense is going to be that they're going to try to retreat to partisan talking points. What they are desperately hoping for is that the president will stop talking about fever swamp conspiracy theories about servers that got buried in Ukraine, and will simply try to attack the Democrats on partisan grounds, that they can don their red jerseys and hope that Republican voters will stay with the president strongly enough that 20 Republican senators, basically enough Republican senators, will stay with him to prevent him from being removed from office. That's the clear indication coming from the Republicans I talk to in town, is they just desperately want him to do things that allow this to be a partisan fight rather than one that is involved in conspiracy theories.
Jonathan Capehart, let's talk Democrats. Speaker Pelosi told this to the Washington Post. He has committed impeachable offenses even before this, but I do think this is more easily understandable by the public. Clearly, she is comparing this to the Mueller report. We know as far as the public, Bill Barr's 4-page summary characterizing, or many would say mischaracterizing, the Mueller report ended up being a huge win for the Trump administration. And it kind of became white noise to a lot of Americans. Is this time different?
Oh, it is absolutely different. The fact that the Speaker announced the impeachment inquiry is the biggest sign of that. I mean, I think Jonathan just laid out so simply why this changed the political calculus. It's so easy to understand. And what's interesting is the president has played into making it easier to understand. First, he put out the notes from the July 25th call, which don't do anything to support his case of, quote unquote, innocence or haven't done anything wrong or that it was a, perfect phone call. Then the whistleblower's complaint comes out. And then every time the president has gone to the microphone, whether it was up in New York or back here in Washington, he has put out even more evidence that what he's done isn't on the up and up. And what we saw earlier today, before he went to Walter Reed, is that he's trying to take his weakness, this incredible weakness of his, and turning it into a strength, standing there and saying, we have to investigate corruption, hoping that the talking point of corruption sticks with the American people, when in the end, the corruption that is happening is the president of the United States, through the powers of his office, shaking down foreign leaders to get them to investigate his political opponents. I never thought in a million years I would be in a position of finger wagging the president for violating the Constitution of the United States.
You bring up a point that I think we should remind our audience. The president, when he was speaking earlier, said that they released the video, they released the transcript from that call. We should remind our audience they didn't. They released a summary. They were notes that the White House released. They were not a verbatim. It was not a verbatim transcript by any means. Is there a chance, though, Jonathan, the president is setting a trap for Nancy Pelosi and saying, you bring a vote to the House for a full impeachment inquiry, and then we'll give you these documents? Do you actually think that there is a scenario where if Nancy Pelosi complies, the White House will then show up with a carton full of paper?
No, I'm sorry, Stephanie. I mean, that assumes that Speaker Pelosi would actually fall for the trap. I mean, anyone who thinks that Speaker Pelosi is going to even give whatever letter that might be coming from the White House any credence hasn't been paying attention. Speaker Pelosi is tough as nails, and she sees her role as a constitutional officer of the United States government. She takes that role extremely seriously. Her somber tone isn't one of affect, it is real. And so she views herself as a co-equal branch of government whose duty it is to uphold and protect the Constitution of the United States. And she sees a president of the United States who is not upholding his oath of office. So the White House can do anything and everything to try to keep this impeachment inquiry from happening, or even a flat out impeachment vote from happening after the normal process has run. They can try it, and they can try Nancy Pelosi, but it's not going to work.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.